Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our LACATS Community Scholars Program, also known as LACoSP. My name is Dr. Lakeisha Williams, and I am the core director of our Community Engagement and Outreach Core that provides this great initiative. And so we are very, very excited about our webinar series that we have had within the last couple of weeks to provide you with a lot of information about the LACoSP program. And so today we are in for a special treat. We have Mr. Brian Melancon, who is the interim core lead of LACATS Tracking and Evaluation Core at Pennington Biomedical Research Center. He has a breadth of knowledge as it relates to budgets and various other aspects relating to data and evaluation. So we're excited to have him providing today's presentation on budget overview. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Brian Melancon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. As Dr. Williams said, my name is Brian Melancon. I've been with the LACATS Center since its inception in 2012, I believe. And my role, while it has shifted a little bit over the years, budgeting has really been something that I've owned for the LACATS Center for some time. So since 2012, both with programs like the Community Scholars Program and others. So hopefully the knowledge here comes from a good place, both in specifically to the LACATS Center program and also overall budgeting. So today, hopefully we will get through all of this and touch base and have questions at the end. But to kind of touch point on the agenda, we'll go over the Community Scholar budget guidelines, the particular NIH forms that you will need to fill out for the Community Scholar program, overall budget considerations and approach. We'll touch on some Community Scholar specific budgeting guidelines, and of course the process for routing and disbursement, a little bit overall, but also how it will work for the Community Scholar program. And so hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll understand what is allowed and not allowed in the Community Scholar program. You'll familiarize yourself with the NIH required budgeting forms. You have a general understanding of how to budget for a federal grant. And of course, identify the regulations, processes, and timelines for general budget approvals, disbursement specifically for the Community Scholar program, grant funds at your institution or a partner institution. So touch a little bit about the Community Scholar award budget, and currently it is $10,000 total. And so that total is direct and indirect. And the LACATS Center, being with federal funds and working with other institutions, we strongly encourage, it's $10,000 total, so not a large grant. So we encourage our institutions that are applying to forego their indirect costs in lieu of this project, in the spirit of the project. $10,000 for a project, as we know these days, it's not a lot of money, but $10,000 is very effective and can get the project done as proposed. But indirect costs, if you put in there, much like some institutions that have indirect cost rates upwards of 50%, you really are cutting into this $10,000 total. So the Community Scholar budget this time, again, $10,000 total, and we really strongly encourage institutions to consider foregoing the indirect cost and providing $10,000 in direct costs to the project as a whole. So with that $10,000, I'll go over some allowed and not allowed expenditures. So keep in mind the Community Scholar program is funded federally through the LACATS Center. The LACATS Center is funded from the NIH, specifically the NIGMS, the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, I believe. And with that, we have to follow federal guidelines and kind of trickle down into the programs and such, and make sure that the expenditures are allowable through this mechanism. So I'll actually touch first on the expenditures at the bottom here that are not allowed. So again, $10,000 grant. You really want this to go a long way for the project. These projects really are being in the community. They're really heavy in terms of the action items that the project is trying to complete. So having salary support for principal investigators or administrative personnel, we really, that's not allowed. So that'll take away a lot from that $10,000. Typical office equipment, computers, tuition, membership fees, honorary and travel expenses for visiting lecturers, and equipment costing more than $5,000. And you'll kind of understand a theme here for this program that really we're taking away things that could be considered, typical overhead expenses like your office supplies. And really, again, this project's very specific, and we want you to focus on the project and not really cover things that don't directly correlate to the success of that project. So touching on these allowed expenditures, so you're looking at printing material and office supplies directly related to the project. Examples of that would be if you're having a focus group, and that focus group requires, pencils, pens, notepads to take notes, or handouts in order to complete a survey at this focus group. That's really what we're talking about here in terms of the supplies that are directly related to the project. So you're going to do a focus group, you're going to go out and administer a survey in the community, these types of things that without that, you wouldn't be able to do the project. Incentives to participants. So again, picking on the focus groups here, a lot of times focus groups, they offer an incentive to those participants that'll come and sit in the focus group, or someone who takes a survey, those types of things. Again, really wanting those individuals to participate. Of course, IRB approval where necessary when it comes to things like participants and incentives, but want to make sure that, again, directly relates to the project. Consultants. This is important too, because sometimes the expertise that is needed to complete the project is not at the institution, or it's not at the academic institution, or it's not at the community partner, or not with the community partner. So you'll go out and you'll actually hire a consultant, whether it's for focus groups or whether it's to do some sort of evaluation of the community in an area, things that are happening in the area. So things, again, these consultants will be providing services that are directly related to the project. And you'll kind of hear me say this over and over again, directly related to the project. So making sure that what this consultant is doing, again, with the printed materials, incentives to participants, refreshments, all these things, these are expenditures that are directly related to the project. We'll talk about justification later, because you'll need a strong justification for everything that you ask for. But again, correlation to the project, that without these things, you cannot complete the project. So lastly, on the allowed expenditure, specific research supplies. Some projects in the Community Scholar Program are research intense with different types of lab supplies and lab initiatives. So it speaks to that. So you're talking about lab expenses, lab supplies, and here, so those things, again, direct related to the project. So talking about our allowed expenditures, now transitioning into the forms that we require for the Community Scholar Program. So these forms, and you can find them directly off the NIH's grants website. The URL is listed there. It's part of the PHS 398. I would call them the form bank. So they have several different forms that you may see throughout the Community Scholar application, or once you're awarded some of the packets. So that's face pages and things like that. If you're an academic institution and you have an office of sponsored projects, these forms are should be very familiar to them. And as we go through this presentation, I'd like to reiterate that, whether it's contacting me, whether it's contacting your own office of sponsored projects, go ahead and reach out and ask questions as you're looking at these forms, planning and trying to figure out your budget. So these are great resources to utilize, and to make sure that there's not a lot of back and forth. Once this thing gets submitted and starts running through that pipeline, that there's no question about, these are correct and moving forward. So really important there to understand and understand what goes in these categories and what you can and can't budget for. So back to the form, page 4, we'll touch base on a few of these sections here. and understand how to fill this out and what some of these categories mean. So this is the top section of the NIH PHS 398 form, page 4. And you'll see that this directly correlates with two things. One, in the top right, you'll see that's the project period. So typically from the RFA, any RFA really, you'll understand when the earliest anticipated start date could be. And so here, whenever you're budgeting, this is the project period. So in the instance, most instances, you'll have July 1 to June 30. So that's where you'll put, of course, July 1, 2024 to 6/30/2025 for a 1-year project. And that will drive, you'll see later, that will drive the various periods that you'll fill out in the NIH form, page 5, that we'll discuss a little later. So if I could, I'm going to steal the laser pointer here so I can talk a little bit more. And again, we're talking about personnel in this category. So specifically those that have a paid role on the project. So this form is already filled out, PDPI, but of course, as we mentioned earlier, that is not an allowed expense for the Community Scholar Program. But with that being said, this is where you'll put if there's, for example, a coordinator or a research specialist that is going to be participating and doing work on the project. You'll put their name, you'll put their role. And then, of course, we'll kind of run down the line here and try to understand calendar months, academic months, and summer months. So this has to do with the effort that you are requesting this person fulfill for this project. And what I mean by that is some people call it percent effort. Of course, we won't be using percentages here because it's calculated in months, but a lot of us know this by FTE, full-time employee, the percentage and the effort that these folks are participating on this particular project. So for example, for a 12-month appointment, which is calculated here in this calendar months, 12-month appointment, if this person's going to spend 40 hours a week on the project, which means they're 100% effort, then that is 12 months. So you would put here 12 calendar months, 12.0, and that is used here to calculate the salary requested, and that is based on the base salary, institutional base salary. So for easy math here, if somebody has $100,000 and you had 12 calendar months, so that's $100,000, you're requesting $100,000. And of course, these fringe benefits, that is a rate. It could be a flat rate. It could be a percentage of the salary requested. These are all things that are set by the organization, whether it be the academic or the community partner. So if you don't know that rate, by all means, reach out, talk to your sponsored projects, your contracts, your business office. They should be able to provide you with that particular benefit rate. So jumping back, if I will, just to clarify, calendar months, academic months, and summer months, this pertains to the type of appointment. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about these are NIH forms, and a lot of the institutions, the academic institutions that are involved, they have different appointments depending on the different type of employee. So calendar months, like for myself, I'm a 12-month employee. I'm a full-time employee. I'm not in an academic capacity. So you might have professors that work on a 9-month academic calendar or a 3-month academic appointment. And again, these are based, this is how you base your percent effort to be used in your salary requested. For example, 10% effort for calendar months, that's 1.2 months. So 10% of 12, 1.2. Academic months, that's a 9-month appointment. So 10%, that's 0.90 months. And then summer months, 10%, that's 0.3 months, 0.30 months. So here again, you list out each personnel that you have here. And if you need more, that's another conversation because you have to use a separate form to add more people that are listed here. But after that, it's just math. Your salary requested is the percentage based on your appointments here that you have. Fringe benefits is added to the salary requested to bring your total, which rounds up down here at the bottom. So now moving on to the bottom half of the NIH form, page 4. And not every category is going to pertain to your project, which is okay. So if you remember from our not allowable category, equipment over $5,000 is not an allowable expense for the Community Scholar Program. So therefore, you're not going to fill out this section here. It's okay. Just leave it blank. No issues there. So next, you're looking at, please note that, itemizing, if it's required to be itemized, it'll say so, like supplies, itemized by category. What you'll put here is you'll just list out line by line your particular supply category that you're going to have. For example, you have focus group supplies, you have marketing materials, you have those lab kits. Each one of those is going to be on a separate line. You could put the dollar amount next to it, but all you need is the subtotal here for supplies. And again, you'll see in other expenses, it does say itemized by category. So same thing here. You need to itemize it out and then subtotal it here on the right. Two more things to point out on this form. First, if you do have a subcontract, so this may be the case for the academic institution. We'll talk more about that later. But if the institution or organization will be subcontracting to another organization, you will list their direct cost here and their F&A costs, their indirect costs here, and they'll be included in your direct cost total. So important there is if you have a subcontract, those things will be listed out here and here, and will be included in the overall direct cost total. To note though, you will not list them out above. So if you have a subcontract that also has supplies, or a subcontract that has inpatient care costs or outpatient care costs, you will not include that in the totals above. That will just be a single line item here. Let's say that your sub has $2,000 worth of direct cost and $0 in F&A. So you're just going to list $2,000 here and include that $2,000 in your total here, and of course here. So don't itemize out those subcontract costs above. They'll just be included in that one line item. Now, of course, my email was listed and my phone number was listed on the first slide. If you have questions, if you want to reach out to me, or again, if you want to reach out to your Office of Sponsored Projects for questions, please don't hesitate. Reach out to these folks. Reach out to me. Be happy to help you throughout the process. Okay, touching on the next page that's required, that is the NIH form, page 5. You can find it on the same page that you could for the form, page 4, and the others. I'll touch base on 2 sections that are relevant here as well. So the form, page 4 that we just talked about, and when I mentioned on the project period, so you can consider each form, page 4 for each year. So if your project's 1 year, you're only going to fill out one NIH form, page 4. If your project is 5 years, you're going to fill out 5 separate form, page 4s. However, you're going to fill out one form, page 5. And as you can see here, initial budget period, that's year 1, and each additional budget period will be listed here. And these categories on the left should be the subtotals for each form, page 4 that you have filled out previously. And what this particular section does from form, page 5, it'll sum it all, and you'll have the total here on your budget for all project periods that you've listed out in the form, page 4. So for the Community Scholars Program, being that it is a 1-year project, you should only fill out the initial budget period here, and it'll total, your total over here could be $10,000 to $10,000 here. So if you're asking yourself, well, why do I have to fill this out if we're filling in all the form, page 4? It seems like it's duplicative, a little bit, right? But the next slide here will show you that there's a section here for the budget justification. So that's the real reason for the form, page 5 for the Community Scholars Program specifically. So here is a text section where you need to provide the justification for each of the items that you've listed out in the form page 4. So I will note that for a community scholars program, and of course for various NIH grants, the budget justification does not always fit in this box. If you have to use a separate Word document, the format is still going to be the same. You still need to go category by category. So if you just follow the form page 4 categories and you just go itemized or item by item and justify those costs that you have listed, I will point out that, as I mentioned before, with, for example, the equipment, if that's blank, you most certainly do not need to provide a section in your justification saying that there is no equipment. That's not necessary. But if you have anything in a particular category, you do need to justify it. So if you have anyone in the personnel section, definitely list them out. So each person, and provide a justification there in terms of why they're on the project, why they're at the effort that's being requested. Basically, you're justifying why you're paying this person on the project. Same with supplies, same with anything else, the consultant or the other categories. You know, again, be concise but clear on the intent and why you're spending the dollars or requesting the dollars for that particular category. So I'll go a little bit deeper into the budget justification and of course cost estimation, both for the community scholars program, but just in general as well. So again, I'll note that it is very important that you do justify all of your expenses. As someone who often reviews the budget justification, first and foremost, if something's missing, we do question it. Well, why are what is this expense? What is that justification for it? You know, even though this project is $10,000, or if the project was $1 million, you'll still need to justify those costs because, for example, with the community scholar program and LACoSP specifically, you know, we have to ensure that the dollars being spent on these projects follow the rules and guidelines set forth by the NIH. So being sure that we have a justification for these expenses, we review that justification, we're comfortable with it, there's no issues, then we know that the dollars that are going to be spent are, you know, within those guidelines. So it's extremely important. Don't miss something. You know, if you feel like, oh, this supply, it's pretty clear, we're using it for focus groups, provide that justification. You can be short and sweet, one sentence, you know, that's no problem there as long as it's concise and clear. Please provide that justification for everything that you're requesting. Just ensures that there won't be any delays or slowdowns, no questions about the project and the budget. You know, oftentimes, you know, something as silly as forgetting an item could slow the start of your project. So be sure that you justify each expense be concise, be clear. Doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be a large justification, be nice and sweet. And again, I pointed out that if your justification does not fit on that form page 5 in that small section, you can provide, especially us, you can provide a separate section. The NIH forms on the PHS 398 section with the link that was previously provided, there is what's called a continuation page that you can provide more justification on. I know for us, separate Word file, as long as it covers these categories, it should not be a big problem. So I will point out that use the budget justification to provide that additional information requested in each budget category. So sometimes just putting focus group supplies is not enough. So again, concise, clear, but focus group supplies. So these supplies are pen, paper, in order to take notes, to complete a survey, you know, so on and so forth, you know, something just a little bit additional that'll clarify and justify what you're asking for. If you do have quotes, you can absolutely put that here. I know at our institution, when our budgets get routed, oftentimes our different service corps provide us with a quote. That's very easy to put, you know, lab expenses, you know, phlebotomy expenses, things like that, that just bam, here it is, here's a line item. You know, you show that in the form page 4, but here's where you can justify that, that $2,000 for lab expenses can be broken down, or do include phlebotomy charges, kits, things like that. Again, doesn't have to be a large explanation, doesn't have to be 2 pages long, just something short and sweet to give a little more information for that reviewer to understand and to approve what it is that you're requesting. So now I'd like to go into a little bit more, broadly about estimating and budgeting for these expenditures. Sometimes the budgeting process can be difficult. You really need to spend a fair amount of time understanding what you're asking for in terms of the cost, because that will feed into the success of your project. And also, oftentimes, if you don't think thoroughly, if you don't spend enough time trying to figure out what costs you're going to need, if you don't have the money for it, it's really hard to complete the project. So spending an ample amount of time planning and estimating the cost that you may need and working that out with the group, it's extremely important, because if you miss something, it's very hard, especially in the world of grants. You get awarded $10,000. You don't get awarded $10,000 plus something you may have forgotten. So going back and trying to find money elsewhere, or if you have to adjust the project, that could be a problem too, because if you forgot something, you have to adjust the aims of the project. You now have to go back to your funder. You have to talk to them about that, tell them what happened, and ask them if you can adjust what you're trying to do with the project, whether that's reducing the N, which may affect the statistics of the project, or you may have to take a piece of your project out because you forgot to budget for something that was extremely important for somewhere else. So you're potentially changing your entire project because you didn't think something may have been missed, or you didn't budget enough. So take a fair amount of time to estimate the costs, and really work with those that are involved in the project, work with those in the Community Scholar Program to talk through some of these things, to really understand. So you don't want to miss something. That's extremely important, that you don't, especially with the budget, especially with money. As we all know, things are getting more and more expensive these days. So taking the time to think through what you need is extremely important. So how do we do that? So it's not just, you didn't always include talking to everyone. So one thing that you could do to start is read very carefully these RFAs as they come out. These RFAs, they list very specific budget guidelines, whether it's the expenditures that are allowed or not allowed, or whether they're very specific on the type of effort required for certain personnel. I know with LACoSP, as an example, the RFA has a minimum effort for those that lead a core. So we have to ensure that every year that our core leaders have a minimal amount of time spent on the project, built to the project for the federal budget, in order to keep inside of those guidelines. So again, that's just an example of a large grant. Even these small grants, they're very particular and very specific about what they want to accomplish for the budget. So read the RFAs carefully. Of course, if it's not specific, there's usually a contact there at the bottom of every RFA on who to talk to. So reach out, ask questions. There's nothing stopping you from saying, can I budget for this? And they should be able to tell you yes, no, or it depends. Have that conversation with the RFA contact person. Something very important here is, do not estimate costs for other departments or organizations. I've fallen prey to this for sure, and I know others have as well. Just because it cost this much last quarter or last year or yesterday does not mean that's the same cost it is today. And while I am very comfortable in understanding on what it has cost in the past for certain things, I don't know, and I'm not involved in these departments to understand how these changes can affect the current budget. So while you may understand it, please work with a department, Office of Sponsored Projects, your business department, to understand what the current costs are for those goods and services. For example, someone's salary may have changed. So you may have done submitted a grant 2 months ago and somebody's salary was X. Well, unbeknownst to you, they got a promotion. Now their salary is Y. So again, you don't want to under budget, especially with salary. For example, if you under budget for salary, if somebody's salary is $100,000 and you budgeted 10%, so that's $10,000, and then they got a raise, so that you budgeted for $10,000. And with that raise, you now have to adjust the time allotted for that person. You have to reduce that time allotted to cover the dollar amount that they now cost. So that's hurting the sign. So now you're not able to have that person on for the amount of time, that 10% that you thought may go down to 5, may go down to 7. Again, all things that, some things we can't control, but what we can control is not assuming what something costs for another department or organization. With that said, when you reach out and communicate with these other offices, make sure you are very clear on what you want and what you're asking for. Scope of work is often what is required. I know from institution to institution, we offer scopes of work in terms of what's expected. If you have a protocol, if you have a schedule, all of these things, the more information you can provide for that estimator, the more accurate you'll get as far as a budget, what it'll cost to do those goods or services. So again, it's very vital. It is vital to clearly articulate what you need. Again, whether that's a scope of work, whether that's a schedule of services, a train schedule, a protocol, all of these things, the more information you can give to those that will be estimating these costs, the better. If you're not sure what you're asking for, again, work with that department, work with the team to clarify that, come up with a clearer scope of work. And with that plan, try your best. I know it's very hard with things that pop up last minute or RFAs that get released with a very short turnaround time. Every single organization, we'll touch a little bit more about this in the routing section, but every single institution, every single organization, they have policies and processes in order to get the most accurate estimate, the most accurate resources needed to you, to the project, to ensure that we won't have that issue after the project starts. So plan, give yourself as much time as you can, ample time to develop those cost estimations. As soon as you know that something needs to get worked on, nothing stopping you from giving so-and-so a heads up. If I know that I need to put together a grant that involves our clinical core, or that involves our communication department, or it involves the community engagement core of LACoSP, the sooner you can involve these departments, the better, because they'll be able to plan accordingly if they know. I mean, everyone's busy these days, and everyone's doing their best. So give yourself ample time, and hopefully that will ensure that whenever it's time to put the budget in, when things get routed and pushed through, that it won't be late. You'll be able to start on time. Things don't take longer. There's not as much back and forth. So you make things more efficient, taking the stress off of yourself. You get a better product out of the budget justification, and it may ensure, things happen, but that may ensure down the line that you won't have any hiccups once the project gets started. So again, I said it earlier, but I'll say it again, and I'm gonna keep saying it. Ask questions, reach out, communicate. If you're not sure about something, you don't know what current costs are, communication is key, especially when it comes to not just budgeting, but just the overall process of putting these things together. So over communication in some instances is perfectly fine. If you're not sure, it's better to ask than to submit something and then it gets kicked back and it's delayed. And I got to restart everything again. Don't wait to the last minute. If you know something's due in 3 weeks, just because it's last minute doesn't mean it takes a minute. Doesn't work that way. So do your best to reach out, contact, start the process, plan, really push to have these things done as early as possible. And it really will. It'll reduce your stress and it'll increase the quality of the product for sure. So going back to estimating for personnel, it can be difficult. And while I mentioned earlier that the RFA may have some sort of requirement, a minimum or a maximum in terms of what is allowed for budgeting of personnel. So one thing I like to point out is understanding what we mean. And as silly as it sounds, but understanding what it means to have 10% effort, 25% effort, these things, you're estimating the work it will take that person on the project. So, backing out a typical work week of 40 hours, 10% of 40 hours, that's 4 hours. Will this person spend 4 hours a week on the project? Count your meetings. If you're going to have a meeting a week, okay, that's at least 1 hour typically for a meeting. So you're right already right there. You're 1 hour in for one meeting. A lot of times these projects require time in the community. So the time it takes for that person to start their day, go into the community, so we're talking hours and hours and hours. So, make sure you think thoroughly through what it means to have 10% effort, 20% effort, 100% effort. 100% effort, you're expecting that person to be on this project 40 hours a week. So, backing this out and understanding what it means to have 10%, 20%, 30%, just make sure you understand what you're asking. Because sometimes, especially if this has to get reviewed, if you're asking a coordinator to complete focus groups throughout the week, contact participants, fill out paperwork, all this, and you give 10%, you probably should relook at that and say, I don't know if this person's only going to spend 4 hours. The focus groups is probably an hour, hour and a half to 2 hours itself. Then you have the paperwork. We all know paperwork doesn't take 30 minutes. Phone calls, calling people back, calling them, so all of this could add up to either a lot of time or, overestimating sometimes is a problem as well, because if you're overestimating that time, you're taking away dollars. Most of these grants, they're a fixed amount. So with the Community Scholar Program, you have $10,000 to work with. So if you have somebody that their salary is $10,000 and you're covering it at 100%, of course, no fringe rate or something like that, that's $10,000. So if that person is all you need for the project and that's $10,000, you're good to go. But if you need materials, if you need participant incentives and things like that, supplies, you really got to pay attention. And this is part of the figuring out your project is, okay, we have $10,000. What can we do with that $10,000? What is feasible? If you have somebody that has to work 40 hours a week and they cost more than 10,000, well, the project's going to have to be scaled back in order to fit, let's say, that person's schedule or that person's effort into that $10,000. So understanding what it means with that 40 hours, that 100%, what that means, that 50%, 12%. So, really understanding and thinking through that really is helpful in terms of budgeting, especially the smaller the project, the smaller the dollars, these dollars, they get eaten up pretty quick into various things. So again, you can break it down. The formulas there if you wanted to kind of think through what it means to have 25% effort or 10% effort. That's really this is standard. I'm not saying this is what you should work with wholeheartedly. Again, work with your business office, your HR, your sponsor projects to really understand, make sure that if this is accurate or not with your institution. But this is typically how the math works across the board. Okay, touching base on the process for routing and disbursement. So I'll speak to routing in general, and then for disbursement, I'll touch on the specifics of the Community Scholars Program and how it looks with the academic and community partner relationships. But generally, and we kind of alluded to this a little bit when we talked about planning and for the budgeting and giving enough time and such, each institution is going to have their own process of routing, which is the process of submitting a project related information to your organization, whether it's the Office of Sponsored Projects, the business office, a leadership team. This is going to be the group that works through the formal approval of that information, whether it's to be submitted for the application, whether it's to be submitted for the generation of a contract and such, but this is your official process. Routing is the official process through these departments or department. Basically to review that information, make sure they're comfortable with it, and sign off on it. So keeping in mind that, sometimes that process takes a while. I know now again, I'm speaking about clinical grants. I know that when you submit information for routing, which also includes the budget estimations by the cores, they require 2 weeks. So take that 2 weeks and keep backing it into what you need to put the information together and such. And very quickly you realize that sometimes putting these things together, it takes a month or more in order to get these things properly routed. You get an accurate budget, you get an accurate information to submit. So again, like I said before, plan accordingly. Reach out as soon as possible, route that information as soon as possible. You really don't want to route something, and ask for it to be rushed, because what you're going to get is a rushed budget. Information may not be accurate. You may have something missing. So again, take into account the time it takes, to do that. So with that said, every organization will have a different routing procedure and timeline. So when you're talking about an academic and a community partner, understand that from both sides, that the academic routing process may look very different than the community routing process. It may be longer, may be shorter, but it will be different. And so make sure that through this community scholar program that you communicate with both the academic and community partners to understand what their processes are. Because you don't want to assume that, because it's not an academic institution, I bet their routing process is 2 days. But it might not be, it might still be 2 weeks. They might need more review based on the type of organization that they are. Same with the academic institution. So I can tell you from experience that, Pennington, our routing process is largely different than Tulane's routing process, which is different than LSU HSC New Orleans process, which is different than Shreveport, so on and so forth. So every institution will be different. So again, it's important to plan and allow for that ample time to route these budgets and the other information required for these organizations. And I point out here, communication is important, and you want to make sure that nothing is missed. That's the big thing. You don't want to miss anything. Also, when the two organizations are working together, each organization may require different things. We talked about scope of work. Scope of work is a good thing to provide when you're asking for various things, but it may be something that's required in order to complete the routing process. I know Pennington has organizational questionnaires that are required. There's letters of intent to enter into contractual agreements. Some of these may be standard in terms of the world of contracts, but there's still things that have to be filled out. So it's extremely important that, again, you plan accordingly, communication amongst your organizations, make sure that you have the time, that you have the right information, because the last thing you want to do is submit something and it gets delayed because you didn't know, or there was something that's missing that you didn't provide. Excuse me. All right, specific to the disbursement of it. So when a community scholar award or awardee is notified, so there's a couple processes that has to happen in order for someone to get the money. So as I mentioned before, this is funded by the NIH. It's federally funded through the LACAT Center grant. And by that, the NIH reviews every federal award. So every award that is using federal dollars from the LACAT Center, the NIH does review it. As you can see, it doesn't matter whether it's a $10,000 project or a $50,000 project. The NIH will review it and generally have the same information that's required. You can see in this slide here, I mentioned the NIH packet, something you'll see and receive. You still have to provide that information for the federal dollars that are going to be provided. So again, this is all part of the process, and the sooner we can get these things started, those projects that require IRB, those projects that are utilized in various institutions, these are things that all build into the time it takes to route and actually get the money. So this is all before the project's even started. Everything we're talking about is before the project even gets started. So again, it's not an impossible undertaking, but it is going to be frustrating if you don't plan and give yourself enough time. So keep in mind as you're planning and doing these things. So to talk about the disbursement specifically, the Community Scholar program, the academic partner, the way that we are trying to set this up, which will reduce the amount of time, so creation of contracts and things. If we have to do it a certain way, we will. But what we aim to do is provide the academic partner. For example, we would provide Xavier, who is the academic partner, with the funds for the Community Scholar project. And the reason for that is from the LACoSP world, we already have an agreement in place with Xavier, and we could just amend that. We can include it, and it cuts down on time necessary to create contracts, create POs, all that on the back end. Again, time, which is important here, especially for a project that takes 6 months to a year. You really need the time in order to do it. So we encourage the working with the academic partner for providing the funds to, and then that academic partner works with the community partner, whether it needs to be a subcontract or if there's supplies involved, that the academic partner can purchase those. If again, from the accounting and the spending standpoint, the more the academic partner can do, the faster these things kind of work. And so again, everything is about trying to get the project started as quickly and efficiently and accurately as possible. But like I say here, the community partner, it may be a subcontract, consulting agreement, or other type of contract to the academic partner. I'm not saying it has to be to the academic partner only. We will work with each individual project on what it looks like and what it needs to be. But overall, I wanted to kind of bring up how we want the project to look as far as where the disbursement of funds go to ensure that speed, that you get your project up and running as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, and you can start doing your project, more importantly, because we want you to do your project, be successful. And that's the intent of the program. So I do note here, general notes. Yeah, Pennington, the project Office of Sponsored Projects will notify the other institutions should there need to be a contract set up. Academic and community partners will be sent an award notice. We will be communicating with you every step of the way once you're awarded, what's needed from the NIH packet standpoint, when the NIH approves it, and then of course when you can start your project based on these approvals and information that's come to us, and we processed everything that needs to be processed. I do have a caveat here that our approval times vary. Please plan accordingly. We've had NIH approvals within days before. We've had NIH approvals within months. It's not normal for the NIH to take that long to approve it, but it has happened. So again, plan. Actually, I think I say that here. Plan, and plan some more. The more communication you have, whether it's through questions or just reaching out, and making sure that you have the right information, all of these things get your project off the ground as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, and successful. And that's what we at LACoSP, we want you to be successful. I want your budget to be successful. I want it to be accurate. I don't want you to have to come back and point out that you didn't have the money for this or that. I want you to budget for what you need, get what you need done, taken care of as quickly as possible and as successfully as we can make it. So if you have any questions, my email address, brian.melancon@pbrc.edu. You could reach out to Dr. Williams and others and Margarita at the Community Engagement Corps with the email address below. Again, I would love to help you with your budgeting if you need it. Please reach out to me or Office of Sponsored Projects at your place. If you don't have one, we'll take care of it. So that's all I have. And again, if you have questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Brian, just for updating us about the entire process with budgets. I know sometimes it can be a little bit confusing and it's very comprehensive. So we just really appreciate your expertise.
No problem.